Everyone. Thank you for joining us. So welcome back to those that were with us last week. Oh, sorry, I've got this recording message on here. I'm gonna continue. Okay. So today we're doing part 2 of our 3-part series on Let's Talk About SCI and Intimacy. So tonight we're going to be talking about communication. So for those who weren't here last week and don't know who I am, my name is Julie and I am one of the peer program coordinators for Spinal Cord Injury Ontario. Excuse me. And I'd also like to introduce you to my co-host Lubna. She is the manager of our peer program. So before we begin, there's just a couple rules of engagement I just want to go through. So everybody was muted upon entry, and we'll keep you muted throughout the session to cut down on background noise. I think it was written in the waiting room, but the presentation is going to be recorded. So if you do not wish to be seen, please just ensure that your video is turned off. And we will have a Q&A session after the presentation, but you're more than welcome to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation if you do have questions. So now I just want to introduce our presenters, Wallace and Melanie, and just give you a little background about them. So Wallace, who is also known as Randy, has a Master of Social Work degree and is a registered social worker. He is currently working as a clinical research associate with a focus on spinal cord injury and other acquired neurological disorders. As a person with a T6 complete spinal cord injury, Wallace lives his life to the fullest. And Melanie Earle has a Bachelor of Arts degree with a double major in English and Women's Studies. She worked as a human resources professional for over 15 years, holding a CHRL designation until 2020 when she retired from the field. She is currently working on expanding her knowledge of spinal cord injury and the spinal cord injury community, fulfilling her passion for working with people and making connections. So Melanie and Wallace, I will now turn the presentation over to you guys.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Julie.
I want to start off by saying, and for those of you out there with spinal cord injuries that feel like human barometers at times, I'm experiencing that the barometric pressure thing. So I've been suffering with headaches for the past few days. So hopefully I'm clear and concise with what I'm trying to say. But I don't know. I just felt I felt I was with an audience that would understand that that's something that you deal with. So. Anyway, Melanie and I are an interable couple. We are, as Julie said, I've got 32 years plus experience, lived experience with spinal cord injury. And Melanie does not have a spinal cord injury, but if you want more information about a more full bio on us, you can always check out our website at t6talk.com.
Thanks everybody for joining us. We aim to be inclusive. We hope that what we have to say tonight resonates with you. Again, we're speaking about our own lived experience, so we certainly wouldn't presume to speak for you. We're always looking at increasing the diversity by interviewing people in the spinal cord injury community, in particular BIPOC and LGBTQ2+ voices, as well as those of you who are single. Whether you want to connect with us tonight through this talk or through our website at a later date, we'd love to hear from everybody.
Right. So we're going to talk for about 30 to 40 minutes is our hope. For those of you that were here last week, we failed miserably at sticking to the time frame, but there's just so much to talk about when it comes to intimate relationships and sex and spinal cord injury. So we're going to try to stick that to 30 to 40 minutes so that we have about 20 minutes to a half an hour of open discussion and conversation time following our presentation. I want to pose a question out there, just something that could maybe stimulate some of the conversation following what we have to say. And that is, do you think that you need to change your communication style? And if so, why? Just something to think about for after our presentation.
Okay, Wallace, so let's start by looking at who we communicate with.
Communication, people often think has to include at least one other person. You've got something to say, you need someone else to talk to. But what people have to remember is that we also communicate with ourselves. We have a continual self-talk inside our head that speaks to us about ourselves and about the world around us. It's how we make sense of things.
Mhm. And let's talk about how we verbally communicate, or alternately we maybe use sign language or communication devices. What are the different types of communication that we might use?
What we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to focus on 3 different types, and we're going to look at passive, aggressive, and assertive communication.
So let's talk about each one of those, and we'll start with passive. What will passive communication be like?
Okay, passive communication, the person is not really involved. Their expectation that other people are able to read their mind after saying very little to nothing.
Mhm.
Passive communication tends to be a lot more withdrawn, doesn't make eye contact with other people. Body language plays a lot into this as well. And basically, what it basically comes down to it is that their needs don't get identified, their needs and wants. So then therefore they go unsatisfied.
Okay. And what about introverts?
Oh yeah. One of the things that is a big misconception is that being an introvert also equals being passive. And that's not true, because you can have people that are introverted that are quiet that can as well be very assertive and sometimes very aggressive.
Okay. So what might a passive communication style look like when it comes to self-talk? So the way we talk with ourselves.
Okay, so when you're thinking about an example for sex or regarding sex, someone is saying that, you know, I'm not sure if I can or will have sex ever again, but you know what, I'm not going to think about it. They're just going to put it on the back burner. A lot of what happens is gets shoved down. Issues get put away, they get swept underneath the carpet. A lot of rationalizing happens too with this, and negative self messages like I'm not worthy. So what I'm thinking about or what might be an issue for me is not worth looking at. So that also then leads to a lot of avoidance behavior. So people are going to stay away from that topic because they just feel like
So it's kind of like head in the sand.
Yeah, it's like
behavior. Yeah.
And there's also a lot of what's referred to as yeah, but statements.
Okay.
So it'd be like, yeah, I know this is important, but I'm not going to worry about it. Or it's, you know, I'm too afraid to address it.
So when we have had discussions about passive communication style, I think the thing that keeps coming to mind for me revolves around consent. That if you have somebody who has a passive communication style, they're not really expressing what their innermost needs or wants are, then how does consent come into things? Especially, I mean, for everything, but especially, you know, our topic is about sex. So, and that's so important. So I would have some concerns about that as well.
About that being a need that they need to address.
Right.
Yeah.
How about aggressive communication style?
Aggressive communication style is, well, it's just that it's aggressive. It's in your face. It tends to be loud. It's one-sided. The individual wants their needs met, and this is the way it's going to happen, and this is what you're going to do to help me.
Yeah.
It's a very closed type of communication. There's a lot of bullying involved in it, potentially a lot of shaming, potentially use of guilt, potentially those types of, very manipulative at times.
So coercive.
It could be.
And that would also probably include like an intimidating body language and some of that as well.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's not a consideration for other people, right? So again, I would come back to that consent piece.
Yeah.
Not to say that everybody who has an aggressive communication style has no regard for consent, but if an aggressive communicator isn't concerned about what other people's feelings are or where they're coming from, then are they ignoring things? And you know, I think we talked earlier about what if it's an aggressive person with a passive person? Then that's
it's
could
a
be
scary
really problematic then when it comes to consent, right?
Absolutely.
Right. What might an aggressive communication style look like when it comes to self-talk? So that aggressive person talking to themselves.
A lot of really negative self-talk and like I can't have sex anymore. That's the way it is. Nobody can tell me anything any differently. I'm not worth it. Really a lot of down or putting yourself down. So a lot of self-bullying, a lot of self-shaming can happen with those types of self-communication. it's a very damaging and harmful message that you could give yourself.
Would there be some level of obsessive thoughts with
There
that?
could be some obsessive thoughts.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of cycling of like the pattern.
Mhm.
So
And I'm guessing that then it's opposite sides of the spectrum, but you have the passive communicator who's not likely to get what they want or need. So I'm guessing with the bullying too, that could very well
it
have the
tends,
same.
yeah, with aggressive communication, you tend also to not get what you need because it heightens the conversation to a point that it
It could
loses
just-
its meaning.
Yeah. Okay. Now, assertive communication. What would assertive communication look like?
People often confuse assertive and aggressive because with assertive, one of the key components of assertive communication is getting your needs identified, getting them acknowledged, and hopefully getting them met.
Mhm.
But what's the biggest difference with assertive communication is it considers the other person. So one of the
So
recommendations.
empathizing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what you can do is, or what I suggest to people is start off by putting yourself in the other person's shoes. So for example, say to somebody, I understand that whenever we discuss subject X, it can get upsetting to you. It's something you might not want to discuss. However, I really feel that I need to know the answer to this. So
Mhm.
I would really like to have a conversation about it. What do you think? So
Mhm.
you put yourself in the other person's shoes, you consider their viewpoint,
Mhm.
and then you open it up again for feedback from that individual. But at the core of things is the need that you have.
So it seems like it's a more diplomatic two-way conversation, right? So
Yeah.
you're demanding airspace, your voice counts, but also you're acknowledging that the other person has those same rights as well,
That's
right?
right. Correct.
So it's about respecting yourself, and it's also about respecting the other people that you're communicating with.
That's
So
right.
your sexual partner or partners, right?
Correct.
And it would seem natural then with what you're saying about assertive communication that consent's right at the forefront, because it is a two-way. It is expressing what you need or want and wanting that other person to do the same thing.
If
So,
you've got both people communicating assertively,
right.
it's more likely that you're going to be able to achieve that.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah. So something that you got to make sure you're doing when you're speaking assertively is you got to really monitor certain things. You have to
Mhm.
monitor your body language. You have to really watch your volume of your speech. Maintain eye contact, but not a stare or glare, or not like a vacant look in your eyes. Be very aware of the person's space. Like with aggressive behavior, people tend to get really in your face. Whereas with being assertive, you respect that and you watch for body language.
Right.
So you're using your own body language, but you're also watching for the body language of your recipient. And people who are passive can often be intimidated by people that are assertive, because after all, you're in a way assuring or demanding in a way that your needs are being addressed, and so they'll back off. But that's not your problem, that's theirs. Like the best you can do is hope that by modeling the assertive behavior that you'll have a recipient that will also do that.
And would actively listen to
That's
you.
right. And active listening is a big part of it. We
Yeah.
will get to that.
Yeah. So it sounds like assertive communication is about being true to yourself.
Yep.
And while being mindful of how you go about the conversation, right? So perhaps we could be goal-oriented and consider our audience, meaning we wouldn't necessarily approach the same conversation the same way with every single person we know. So, if you're looking at your intimate partner, or if you're intimate partners yourself, it's about kind of being mindful of that and approaching that specifically to that person, right?
Mhm.
And you also have to accept the fact that it could get messy, because for some of us, by stating what we need or what we want, there's the possibility of conflict. And for many of us, we feel that conflict is a negative,
Right.
And could be the end of things or blow things up, right?
And really, when it comes down to, well, when you look at conflict too, a lot of people think that you should have a relationship that never has conflict, that you never argue, that there's never opposite ends of things. And that's quite the opposite, that having arguments and having some conflict within your relationship is not only normal, it's also healthy, because it shows that people are expressing what their needs are.
And invested, I guess, too.
They are, and
Yeah.
they're not just backing down, because, for example, if someone is a more passive communicator and or has more passive self-talk, they're more likely to kind of back down.
Right, right.
If you've got someone who is more on the aggressive side of things, they're going to lash out. They're going to be very aggressive and try to force their point forward. Oh, I had another thought and I lost it. Oh, we all not all people have just one or utilize just one type of one of these three types of communication. We could actually use all three at different times. It really depends on the situation, but the goal should be to always communicate to yourself and to others in a very assertive manner. We're built a certain way. It's that nature versus nurture,
right,
or topic. Some people are born a little more aggressive. Some people are born a little more passive, right? And they have their environments and their life situations that will foster the development of those things. But again, the end goal is to try to be assertive in your communication all the time. I know I'm repeating myself, but I mean,
that's okay.
It's an important point to put forward.
What if somebody speaks quietly? Does that mean that they're passive?
No. You can have a lot of people that are really very soft-spoken and very quiet, just like with introverts, being assumed that they're all passive. If you're people can be very quiet, but at the same time be super aggressive. Yeah.
What about talking, loud talking?
Oh, loud talking is always just aggressive. Yeah, when people are shouting and yelling and
which is different from boisterous, right? Like, so we're not talking about boisterous.
Oh, you can get excited about things and your voice elevates. That's one thing. But when you are actually aggressively yelling at somebody, that's just aggressive.
Okay. And I guess that I would think about defensiveness too, and that becoming defensive could also possibly lead to aggressive behaviors as well, right? And I wonder if that we think about ego and insecurities and fear and the vulnerabilities that we all feel and power dynamics, right, would come into it. What might an assertive communication style look like when it comes to self-talk? Give me some examples of what you might say to yourself.
Okay, well, example, despite what other people might think, I know I've got certain needs and I am going to pursue those. There's also, I can't do this right now, but it doesn't mean that I can't, it's always going to be the case. So I'm going to investigate what's possible. And what I'm saying here is something like people with erections, right now I know that I have erectile dysfunction, but there's ways that I can explore this and take a look at it. So you got to be very, very kind to yourself.
So know that you have value.
Absolutely.
And know that you're a good person and you're not defined by it. So being kind to yourself. And it's so puzzling because so often it's so much easier to be kind to somebody else than it is to be kind to ourselves. We're could be our own worst enemies and be our own barriers.
Absolutely.
To things, right?
Yeah. And like we talked about last week with myths and misconceptions.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a life of messages that we're given. And then when you have that spinal cord injury, a lot of what happened and what you've heard and learned pre-injury, you're going to bring with you post-injury until you are found evidence to the contrary.
Right. Yeah. And that you can start examining that and maybe throwing it to the wayside.
And that's what it is. I mean, it's a lot of trial and error, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of practice. But and I mentioned this last week, it's not just a matter of taking your negative self-talk and flipping it and making it positive. It's really investing yourself and taking a look at what are the messages that I am giving myself. And if they are very unhelpful, then you look for ways to investigate them to see if they're true. If they are true, then you find a way to cope with that. If they're not, then you find something better to replace it.
So let's talk about body language. What might this include and how do the different communication styles differ from one another?
Okay, so with body language, facial expression, if it's from head to foot. So it could be from the way you crinkle up your forehead and the way you furrow your brow, right to the way you cross your legs and position yourself when you're having a conversation with somebody. It could be.
What about a passive person? How might they?
A passive person is going to sit back. They're going to seem, they're going to try to look like they're trying to escape from the situation. They're going to sit back away from it. They're not going to engage, no eye contact, really speak very little. and try to look for ways to escape from the encounter.
Nervous laughter, maybe.
Nervous
too.
laughter was a big one.
Yeah,
I remember my daughter used to laugh when I would punish her when she was a kid, when I would discipline her, and it drove
After
me.
talking later, you found
Oh,
out.
I didn't find out till later that she was actually nervously laughing. I just got more angry because how she was laughing at me.
Yeah.
But no, it's just nervous laughter.
What about aggressive body language? What might that look like?
Examples of aggressive body language would be a very intense glare or a stare,
Mhm.
a furrowed brow, getting into your face, like not appreciating body space.
Right.
And again, a lot of really quick aggressive movements and gestures, those types of things.
And arm crossing, all of those things, right?
Arm crossing is a tough one.
Yeah, it is,
Yeah.
because there's other reasons why somebody might cross their arms. So for yourself specifically, I know that you cross your arms a lot for balance, right? So that's one of the things to consider when we're looking at all the things that we're saying are assertive body language, that cultural differences with regards to eye contact and physical distancing, right?
Sure.
Not everybody is going to see it the same way.
And difference between genders and
Right.
all that stuff.
And then disabilities, visible and non-visible, where body language or the ability to read body language maybe is atypical. But we're focusing on intimate relationships. So although we shouldn't assume, I think we're going on based on the assumption that you are communicating with somebody that you know somewhat, so that you can, as an assertive communication style, you could ask for clarity if you're not sure, right?
Yeah.
So would it be about kind of like seeing the whole picture?
Yeah, it's looking at the whole thing. And I mean, because if you're looking at any one of the types of communication in isolation, it could mean something completely different. When you take them together and build the whole picture, that's when you get the fullest, I guess is the word I'm looking for, a picture of what the person's trying to say.
What about assertive body language?
What do you mean?
What about what does assertive body language look like?
Oh, assertive body language.
Sorry.
It's okay. You said assertive. See, I thought aggressive. So I don't know what it was, but assertive would be more showing that you're engaged in the conversation. So maintaining some real decent eye contact with the person. There's active listening, which is important as well. Nodding. Do you want me to explain about active listening?
No, we can talk about
later.
that later. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a matter of showing the person that you are involved, that you are part of the conversation,
Not shrinking,
yeah,
but not puffing up.
that's right.
Right?
It's kind of that in between.
So the assertive communicator doesn't make assumptions. They request the clarification, like we said earlier, right? So it's about making a commitment to improve upon your communication skills. So it's practice, right?
Yeah.
What about the listening side? Let's talk about active listening.
Okay, so for active listening, it is, you want to show to the person that you're not only listening, but you're hearing what they have to say. So again, like I said, eye contact, you could use cues like nodding, and when it's your turn to talk, take some of what they've said, reiterate it, and repeat it back to them so that they know that you heard what it is that they were
Because it also
talking
gives
about.
them time, they could be able to clarify if that's not what they meant.
That's right.
Right? Yeah. And it's like a two-way street, right? So it's just.
Yeah, good communication is a combination of what is being said and how it's being presented.
What about when somebody stops listening and they just silently start to gather all of their evidence for an argument? So they're not listening to what you have to say anymore. And maybe there's some body language of, scowling or.
So sitting back,
Yeah.
but at the same time, kind of glaring and looking at you.
Right.
Well, it would be an example of passive aggressive.
Yeah.
Because they're being very passive in their body and their stature. But what their face has to say is very aggressive.
And they're ignoring.
Yeah, and
the
they're ignoring what you have to
conversation,
say.
right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like ideally we should be assertive communicators, right?
That's right.
So assertive communicators meaning what we put out there in our active listening
Right.
skills,
So the whole
right?
picture, then you add what's being said, how it's being said, and then how it's being heard.
Right.
Is all part of it.
So I know that from a personal note, there's times when you're speaking assertively to me, and because of my history, I start to shut down.
Okay.
At that point, I can acknowledge what you're attempting to do and my inability to continue the conversation at that time, and I'll request like a timeout, right? And so that I can gather my thoughts. knowing that if I was pressed to continue the conversation at that time, I'll go from being an assertive communicator to either being passive or aggressive. So knowing I need to have that space in that time. And I think for myself, the role of cognitive behavioral therapy was key for me. So both the personal therapy that I did on my own, you know, to go back, because this stuff didn't happen just yesterday. This is the stuff that we've learned from when we were little kids, right? And our experiences. But going back and really taking that active role to find out what was going on. And then as well, the couples therapy that we did really helped to be able to communicate those things to you.
Right, and that's assertive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's assertive communication, because you take into account what my concerns are and where I am, as well as your own,
Right.
to have the needs met.
I think it's also the confidence that you have in yourself, or the confidence you have in the relationship as well. So that when your partner isn't necessarily bringing their A game, that maybe you cut them a little bit of slack, as long as it's not something that's done, you know, on a regular basis. And considering the 3 forms of communication that you've gone through, how do they impact conversations with regards to sex?
Okay. Passive, you're not likely to get what you want. So
Or what you need.
or what you need.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you're aggressive, then there is, as you mentioned before, that issue with consent, right? And then again, if you're not likely to get what you want, because you heighten the environment, the situation so much that the initial point gets lost. So assertively, you know what you want, you express how you want it, while also leaving it open to understand the view of the other person.
Right, right. So would you say that truth is always the best policy?
Truth and honesty is always the best policy. Absolutely. Finding your way to these truths is really very important, because if you're not honest with yourself about what your needs are and what your abilities are, then it's going to be very hard for you to be able to communicate that with another person intimately. So you need to know those.
So what do you think what do you think it is that people fear about being open and truthful, or where does that stem from?
Well, again, we go back to last week when we talk about inaccurate beliefs that are born from myths and misconceptions. So you end up with feelings of rejection and feelings of or isolation, guilt, shame, and there's also a certain respect or a certain aspect of outing, because if you become aware that what you need intimately and sexually is something that sways from what's called the normal, then you might be afraid that someone's going to think, you know, am I some kind of freak? What's wrong with me? Why am I thinking this way? Right. And then there's also it leaves you very vulnerable.
Right.
And the vulnerability a lot stems from that sense of loss of self.
Okay. Okay. So where should people start then?
With themselves.
Right.
Always start with yourself.
Right.
Because the relationship that you have with yourself is the most important. I mean, relationships come and go, but the relationship that you have with yourself stays.
And not everyone is looking to have a relationship.
And that's right. Not everybody is looking to have a relationship. Some people want long-term relationships. Some people don't want any relationship whatsoever. So it really depends on just knowing what makes you feel good, being honest with yourself about that, and being able to share with the other person what gives you pleasure. And the self-talk. If you find that the self-talk that you're experiencing is so intense and you find it really hard to shake it, then I would suggest, again, finding a therapist to go to that does CBT. Also, talking to peers is a great way of combating and dispelling some of those myths and those untruths that you hold.
Because I guess too, like, how can you move forward with yourself if it's just a relationship with yourself, or how do you move on to somebody else if you haven't resolved what's inside of you?
Absolutely.
Right? And have a good relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
And not to say that every day is going to be a bright shiny day with rainbows and unicorns, but
baskets of puppies.
Baskets of puppies, that's right. So we ended last week's session talking about thoughts, feelings, and behavior.
Right.
So just to kind of go through that again, we talked about thoughts, so that internal dialogue The example being, because I cannot get an erection, I can no longer have sex.
Right.
Followed by feelings, which would be the reactions to our thoughts. So the emotion, the helplessness, anger, inadequacy, and then the behavior, the reaction to those feelings, right? Which could possibly be avoidance behavior when it comes to interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I would say, and I'm going to repeat myself, explore what is true and what's untrue. Okay. Look for the evidence. It's all evidence-based. Communicate this with yourself. Gather this information. And also, one thing that I found was always successful for me was, and I had my therapist say this to me all the time, what would you say to a friend? So if you have this thought, you have this feeling, this belief, how would you translate that to a friend?
Mm-hmm.
And an example was, I can't get an erection, so I'm no longer of any use. I can't have sex. So you would say to a friend, well, you might not be able to get an erection, but there are other things you can still do.
So think about that.
Think about that kind of thing.
And then practice that with
Yeah,
yourself.
and there are a lot of other ways too. And if you want to look it up, there's a lot of self-help books, or you just bleeped.
That's okay.
Oh, okay. Our computer was doing something wonky. So yeah, there are a lot of self-help books out there. There's also, like I said, going to therapists and stuff. But to find questions that are thought-challenging questions, like a friend. What would you say to a friend?
How does that change the feelings?
Because what happens is, once you change the thoughts to something that's true, something that is more helpful, something that is healthier, then the feelings that come from that are also then more positive.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get more feelings of hope. You'll get more feelings of looking for the future. It's a much more positive way of looking at things.
And then the behavior.
And the feelings. And then the behavior would be, and if we take a look at that example about erections, then the behavior would be exploring other ways of having sex.
Right. So again, we talked about peer support. We also live in a time where, information is at our fingertips. So we can, look at the Google.
Yeah.
Always the caveat there of looking at investigating with a critical lens, right?
Yeah. And I would say, when you're looking at the Google, if you have something that you want in terms of challenging your thoughts, just Google thought challenging questions and you'll get a whole bunch of them.
Good idea. And it takes effort and time. And we have this life. So what are your priorities? What do you want at the core of it? I'm not talking about, that new pair of jeans or whatever. What do you really want out of your life? And how do you want to spend that time? And generally in healthy relationships, people have similar priorities, right? So it kind of helps that you're kind of working towards the same sort of goal. Right?
Hopefully, yeah.
Can you describe the first time post-injury that you were open and honest about what you wanted with regards to sex?
Okay, here we go. Stories from Wallace.
Keep it brief.
I'll try to keep it brief. It was my sexual revolution. So I'm hoping that by sharing this, what it's going to do is it's going to kind of encapsulate all of what we talked about. So we went through all of these kind of facts and the way of looking at things. But for me, it was 14 years post-injury. So I want to go back real quick to the first relationship I had after my.
So that was just after post-injury.
So post-injury was like, in terms of my sexual revolution, was 14 years past. But 2 years after my injury is when I ended up in my first significant relationship. And it didn't have there was no sexual chemistry. There was no, like when I first saw this woman, I was not attracted. I did not have.
What was your self-talk at that time?
My self-talk was awful. I felt that because she showed interest in me, I latched on. And I thought, I don't want to be alone. I'm going to be alone forever if I don't find someone quick. This person is showing interest in me, so I got to stick with it.
So you had a lot of aggressive self-talk then.
A lot of really aggressive, a lot of really negative self-talk in terms of what I was capable of. And that went on for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I did learn how to pleasure myself. So I learned how to masturbate. Never got to the point of having an orgasm. So, but I knew what felt good on my body. Tried communicating that at one point in time, and it was an abysmal failure. So I just gave it up. We didn't communicate at all about anything. Lived totally separate lives. So I immersed myself in work, school, sports, and I satisfied my sexual needs through masturbation. And it wasn't until just before my daughter was born, 10 years post-injury, that I actually went into counseling because I was worried that I wouldn't be a good dad. Again, a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of aggressive self-talk. You can't be a father. This, again, coming from the myths and misconceptions that I held true after my injury, coupled with messages from the family and other outside people that said, how can you possibly be a parent? So I went into counseling with that being my goal. But what he had me do was really explore all of the thoughts I had about myself. And it's interesting that even though during that time period, I was modeling and had my picture in catalogs and billboards in Toronto and all kinds of stuff. So there wasn't a question that other people found me physically attractive, but I still had all of these negative thoughts about erectile dysfunction, negative thoughts about the fact that I wore a leg bag, negative thoughts about not having control of my bowels, body image issues, skinny legs, the whole bit, scars on my chest. I was just so worried that nobody would accept me for all of who I am.
Then what happened?
Then I started traveling with hand cycling, and I started noticing, coupled with this newfound confidence, that other people actually did find me attractive and were interested in me and all of me. And I realized at that point that where I was, I had to stop. I had to make changes. And I ultimately ended that relationship. And then shortly after, I was on a trip to Germany where I competed with hand cycling. And after the final event, we were in the beer tent and everybody was celebrating. And I met this very lovely woman from England. And our sexual chemistry from the get-go was just incredible. I couldn't believe it. It was just, it was fabulous. So, I mean, nothing happened on that trip, making out, sitting on my lap, roping each other, that kind of stuff. But that was it. And it was during communications back and forth that I was going to go to a race in the Netherlands, and she was going to join me and spend the weekend with me. So this was the first time I got to actually exercise communication, proper communication, where we said at the very beginning, nothing was going to happen with us, that we were just going to sleep in the bed and we were going to snuggle until the race was done. I had to focus on that, and that's all we did until the race was over, and then close off.
Yeah.
But the communication was there.
Yeah.
It was the first time I was able to communicate that this is how my body works, and this is how I like to be touched. First person to ever touch me that way. And again,
and how did she communicate with you?
She communicated with me that there was going to be no intercourse, that was off the table. And I said, that's fine, because I didn't bring what I need to have intercourse anyway. Namely pills.
But she communicated what she needed. And
what
wanted,
she needed and
right?
wanted as well.
So you both were using assertive communication.
Absolutely.
And what was the result of that?
2 days in bed. And I didn't, it was amazing, because not once did I take off my underwear, and not once did I take off my leg bag. So there I was sporting my boxer shorts and my leg bag on my leg, and it made absolutely no difference whether or not, it was, was fabulous.
I would express my gratitude to her, and as well to you, to put yourself out there and to have that confidence in yourself, because it brought you to where you are today, and to have the relationship that you and I have. If it wasn't for that, what we have wouldn't be as good as that what we have right now.
It moved me forward, because I know we've on a timeline, but I want to say real quickly that it was back in that, during that 10-year period, that I started investigating and lecturing about sex and sexuality. And I gave it up because I felt like such a hypocrite, because I was not practicing what I was preaching within the relationship that I was in.
But you knew it was possible.
I knew it was possible, but I didn't communicate it. It wasn't until I had that confidence in myself, changed a lot of those messages I had about how it worked, and then put it into practice.
That is exactly what we've talked about. That where does it start? It starts with yourself.
Starts within yourself.
Right?
Yeah.
So thinking about communication and sex, consider the scenario of two people in a relationship and then a spinal cord injury occurs.
That Thankfully, there have been some changes in that recently, but quite often the partner, whether they have spinal cord injury as well or they don't, the partner of the newly injured person is left out of the equation. They are left in the dark.
There's some changes to that
There
now,
have been
but-
some changes to that recently, which is fantastic. But it's important to realize that they go through some changes too.
Right, it's not
And
just one person.
It's not just one person, and that their own self-talk has to be something that they need to address. So I would say it's a matter of each person doing an individual work on the messages they give
Right.
themselves, and then also come together and do group
So
or couples.
So individual therapy and couples therapy as well, so that both people need to work separately and then together. So,
That's
and I
right.
imagine the when would depend on a lot of factors as far as when you'd actually want to approach the topic of sex, right?
Everybody's different. I mean, a lot of the research says that for both men and women, it's one of the top issues right after
Right.
injury. So yes, the timing is an issue, and there's no perfect answer. But as long as it's made available to them right from the very beginning, then they can choose when they're ready to go for that. If there were an issue with communication, well, this is like, yeah, that's an important thing, is that if there's an issue with communication before the injury, then there's likely going to be an issue with communication after the injury, and that not everything is due to the spinal cord injury. So
Right.
you got to remember that too, that a lot of it, you know, I mean, it's part of it, but we come into the spinal cord injury with other stuff. Life happens, you know, life is all part of it. So there's opportunity to move forward as a couple and as an individual, and not all relationships are necessarily forever, with the exception of the relationship that you have with yourself.
Right, exactly right. So thinking about communication and sex again, consider the scenario of someone finding a partner after spinal cord injury.
Be upfront. And again, it starts from within, accepting yourself, but get to that point of knowing what you're capable of, knowing what you're deserving of, and communicate that, because you don't want to invest a lot of time with somebody only to find out that once, you know, that you're not a match, that you're not a connection.
Okay.
That's no different than any relationship.
And I guess it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for, you know, a booty call, or are you looking for, you know, a long-term relationship, right? I remember we were both looking for long-term, and I think the second time you came over, you were cooking dinner or lunch or something, and I was carving pumpkins, and that whole time we talked about sex. So, I mean, it was just like, let's just have these conversations right now.
And I asked if you wanted to go for a nap.
A nap, that's right. And if someone is uncomfortable with discussing specific sexual activities with their partner, where should they start? So an example, being tentative about requiring protection when in sex, or if somebody wants to try something new, what if they haven't tried oral sex, or anything anal tends to be really taboo, or introduction of toys, that where do you start?
Again, it goes to starting with yourself and asking yourself that question, why? Why am I tentative about this? Why do I have some reservations about this? Don't go into anything blind. Make sure that you give informed consent to everything that you do, but also examine why is it that you might be holding yourself back with certain
So it's
things.
about figuring out what you need, what you want for yourself, and getting to a point where you're comfortable with it, so that then you can have
communicate
that confidence
That's
to
right.
communicate with somebody else.
Right.
And I guess there's that need to love yourself first,
That's right.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we need to be, for various reasons though, throughout our lives, we go through different levels of desire.
Mhm.
So there could be hormonal, situational, trauma, stress, or varying pain levels that a person might be going through.
Yep.
So what would be an assertive way to express this to your partner or partners?
Make sure that you express what's going on before it becomes an issue. So if you know that there's something that's affecting your desire or affecting yourself in terms of how the quality and what's going to happen with your intimate life, make sure that you communicate that again with yourself, but be out there. The whole idea is truth and honesty that comes from a place of confidence and self-awareness.
And there's probably a lot of I statements.
Oh yeah. Well, especially when you're communicating to another person, and particularly when it has to do with emotions, because making the statement, I feel X, people can't take that from you because they're your feelings. You know?
Rather than it talking about the other person, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So if the issue is the relationship, though, it's important not to pretend like it's something else. that
No.
you need to actually deal with the problem with the relationship.
Which is what I
right?
fell into with that first relationship
Right.
that I talked about. Whenever there'd be what's wrong, what's going on, I would just say nothing. You know, it would.
Okay, so we didn't do too bad with timing. I think this is a good place to stop this week's session. We were going to talk about.
I don't think you can talk any faster. So.
Yeah. We were going to talk about communication with support services who may help couples or individuals with sex. But the more we talked about it and the more we investigated it, the more we felt that this should be a session all on its own. We didn't want to just talk about it as like a singular statement and then move on from it. If there's an interest in having us delve into that, we are happy to investigate that and do another session on that. So just let us know. Wallace, I believe there's something you wanted to follow up on a question somebody asked you last week.
Yes, I don't know if the person is here, but last week somebody asked me if I'd ever had a relationship with someone who also had a spinal cord injury. I answered the question, but I answered it in a very close-ended way.
I think because of our time.
I think,
right?
yeah, because we were under such time restrictions, like we had to go. But if you have more to ask, if I didn't answer that question fully, or if you want to let me know why you asked that question, please, I would like to answer that more completely if you weren't satisfied with what I said.
And do you want to circle back to that question that?
Yeah,
you
we'll
asked at
circle
the
back to
beginning?
that question too. Based on what we talked about with communication styles, does anybody think that they may need to make changes to their style, and why might that be?
So Julie, is there anything that came up on the chat for questions that we might?
Nothing in the chat, but if anyone does have any questions at this point, please feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to just ask in person.
Nope.
No questions.
My wife is sitting over there and we're chatting away anyways.
Yeah.
Hi.
So what did you guys think, Alex?
I think this is really good. I had a T4, T5 incomplete back in 2013.
Okay.
And I mean, that was, I think what somebody told me before was when the guys, the first thing they think about is an erection, and women think about something different when they go through a spinal cord injury. And that was obviously my first concern. But my wife is a registered nurse, and we actually end up spending a lot of time talking anyway. So, but there was nobody to turn to at that point to even talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
So really appreciate the stuff that you're doing.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And again, it comes from, like you said, there was no one really to talk to initially, right? And so it's hard. And they do say that, that with men, the number one concern after injury is about sex.
Well, for a
paraplegic,
right.
And for quadriplegic, it's second only to hand function.
Yeah, and I think so little time is taken to really think about our communication skills, that when we're faced with some of the adversity that we go through in life, it can make it that much more difficult.
It's huge. It's huge.
And it takes a long time. I mean, it took us this long to find one another.
Yeah.
And to have the type of communication that we have, right? It takes practice.
I think I can honestly say that the downfall of every relationship I've had to do with some kind of hole in the communication.
Oh, I'd say that's 100% for myself. And people, again, I think I talked about this last week, that people talk about downfall of relationships having to do with sex and finances. But I would say it has to do with communication of those things, right? Or lack thereof, that can be problematic.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So scary.
I see someone.
It just, oh God, is it okay if I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Sherry.
Yeah, of course, Sherry.
No, I just wanted to say I really found it interesting how you presented communication. It was actually quite timely too, because we're running a family connection support group through spinal cord injury, which I'm a part of, and part of our talk today was on relationship changes and communication, and presenting it more from looking at, are you more of an instrumental communicator or an affective in terms of the emotions and verbal and nonverbal? But that was a really kind of refreshing way to approach it, which I'm going to try and figure out how to incorporate somehow.
Oh, good.
Well,
I gotta watch it again. I can't just do it once, but yeah, I'll be sure to
Thank you
credit
for
you.
your
I
feedback,
promise.
That's
Sherry.
great.
It means a lot.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
And I mean, and coming from someone who knows a lot about the different communication styles and all that stuff, you know, being a therapist yourself, right? So you get that. So
Mhm.
I appreciate that feedback.
Thanks.
What I was wondering was, actually, when we were talking back and forth, was how many relationships actually end after somebody has a spinal cord injury. Because I also do a little bit of peer support when I can, and I was surprised by the number of relationships where their partner left them because they had a spinal cord injury.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's I don't know. I can't think. I mean, I did read something about the stats when it compared the spinal cord injury community to non, but it is higher. It's considerably higher, and it's really sad. And what do you think, Alex? Do you think that if communication was better, would that save more marriages? Like based on the fact that you said you guys communicate a lot, so.
Yeah, I think maybe the communication. I think there were different reasons why their partners left,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure communications would have fixed all that, but
What
yeah,
about
I think it's
support?
what's that?
What about supports, Alex? Like, do you think some of the partners, if they had more support for them?
Yeah, I think some at least I know on one where when it wasn't going to be her kind of relationship she wanted to be into. I think she told him she didn't want to be a caregiver, and just packed up her bags and left, and that's kind of heartbreaking when you hear that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's something that we'll touch on a little bit next week, is that being careful not to blur that line between caregiver and intimate relationship, right? Because when you cross over and the person becomes a primary caregiver, and that intimate part is put behind that, then you get a lot of, like, the relationship is very fractured, and ultimately with a lot of them they end up ending. So
caregiver in itself is such a term coined by the medical community, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm very uncomfortable with is the connotation that the person with a spinal cord injury now automatically becomes a care recipient, and which is not always true, because
That's
in
That is
most
true.
in most families, both the partners are equal parts, caregivers and care recipients. So
that's right.
yeah, so I think that could be lost. Now, I have another question, just like Alex, but it is coming from the point of view as a peer mentor, because we are not counselors, we are not advisors, we only share lived experience. And although there are communication styles, it's also like our culture that plays really into how we communicate about sex. And usually in Toronto, when I go out and speak to newly injured individuals, what I feel is people are not very comfortable, and they say, I've been married for 30 years. And this is not just a specific gender or a specific community, but it is just very similar across cultures and communities, that people say, I've been married for so long, we've never really ever had to talk about it. We just had our nonverbal communication, and that was the basis of foundations of our sex life. And now how do I tell people that I'm ready now? How do I tell people that I want to explore this part, and my partner is afraid of hurting me, or is afraid
Right.
that it will not be like before, is maybe watching out for disappointment. So obviously, as a mentor, I'm not supposed to share more than my life experience, and I shut off. But if there was any saying or any resource I could direct people towards, that would be great too.
So I think is there a resource for people
For
to how to approach the audio was a bit tricky.
Yeah.
I think to talk of when somebody is ready to actually talk to their partner about ready to explore sex again when there really wasn't a lot of conversations about
Sex
sex
prior to.
prior to. It was more just the nonverbal cues and things that just kind of happened, and rather than having a
Right.
so would it be coming down to like maybe considering couples therapy
Yeah.
to try to help the two people find that communication,
Yeah.
that language for one
Yeah.
another,
Yeah.
so that they have support? Because if you've never done it before, it's pretty
Yeah,
hard.
that's a huge step.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you're breaking all kinds of ground there, right? So I would say I don't know of any like resources in terms of written resources, but yeah, I think that I would suggest couples counseling. I really would.
Because then it would be
That would be-
specific to the people too, rather
Yeah.
than picking out something like a book or a pamphlet or something that's online that would be a little more generic. I think that this is so specific, and it would be so specific to those people, to their needs, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
We do have a comment and a question in the chat box. So
Okay.
the comment, I had my injury very early in life and never knew what sex was like before. But I found that simply just being honest and open when communicating about sex has worked best. Acknowledging that there are some things that I can't do, but then focusing on the things that I can, what
Yep.
works and what doesn't.
Great.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
You know, and if the person who shared that, if they would be interested in sharing their story of how they came to that, we would love to put that on our website with the stories page. Like, we wouldn't use people's names if they don't want names being used, but I think that these are the stories that need to be shared.
Yep.
So that people, if somebody else comes, you know, is in the same circumstance, that they don't feel alone, that here's somebody else who has that
Yeah,
story.
especially someone who was injured early. You don't
Right.
get as many of those cases,
Right.
those instances, because most people are injured later on in
Yeah.
life. And what about those people that hadn't had any sexual history prior to
Yep.
their injury? And how do they go about communicating that? So, I mean, that would be a great story
Would be
to have as a
awesome.
peer story.
Yeah.
And you said there was a question too, Julie?
So there's kind of a question and a couple answers. So someone was just wondering if there was any women with spinal cord injuries in long-term relationships, like on this call. So then there was someone who answered yes, and then another who said, yes, they've been in a relationship for 20 plus years. So I'm not sure if there's a question there, or if someone was just more curious if there was women in a long-term relationship.
So for that individual that has been in the relationship for 20 some odd years, if they don't mind chiming in, how important would you rate your communication in terms of helping with the longevity of your relationship?
I can chime in a little bit. I've
Sure.
been married for 35 years now, and communication is by far the most important thing. But it took a lot of years to figure that out, and counseling, and yeah, it's and now it flows so much easier. Like, it did take a long time. It was, raising 2 children in between that time too,
Sure.
and their needs were first, and so we put ours on the back burner, and then my disability, and then going through doctors and surgeries after surgeries after surgeries, and sometimes hospital stays, and she had the little ones at home, and I was at the hospital, and then she's balancing work and family, and then sometimes that communication just went on the back burner, and we've learned over the years that that's the most important, is to communicate, and it's not easy. It takes work to do that.
How did that feel, Phil, when the two of you were able to do counseling and find that connection again and be able to communicate more clearly? Like, did it seem like a relief for the two?
Oh
of
yeah,
you?
it was huge. It was
Yeah.
like the burden had just dropped off my shoulders,
Yeah.
because I finally said, okay, I'm going to be honest with everything, and and just lay it out on the line and just say what I think, and and it made a big difference in our marriage.
Good.
And
Good.
yeah, so yeah, I would say to anybody that communication is the key, but then from the sex standpoint, when you're raised with parents that never told you anything about it, and that old Victorian view, and stuff like that, you really had to learn a lot on my own, and just communication, and that wasn't easy at times. And then the injury and the disease that is taken over my body, that's been tough too, and then you just trying to learn it all on your own. Like I told Wallace before, I've learned everything. I've navigated all of this by myself. I didn't have any peer support or anything until this last year, and Wallace has been just a life send. It's a lifesaver. It's opened up a whole lot of new doors for me, and especially this, like the spinal cord injury in Ontario, has been amazing for me. Like
it's been great, Phil.
And then the course I took and everything, like it just, I try to get in as many Zoom meetings as I can for every subject almost, because I'm learning so much, so it's just
it's good to be informed, right? It's
absolutely
just good to be informed.
Yeah, absolutely. The more I learn, especially with aging, with spinal cord injury and stuff like that, I've thought for many years, like, okay, I'm getting older, and what's it going to be like when I'm older, and what's more aches and pains, or is it going to be it's just slowing down in general, right? So it's just
with the more sessions that you're attending, Phil, do you find it easier and easier to chime in and be a part of the conversation rather than
absolutely. Tonight I finally said, okay, I'll chime in, and
right on.
I finally said, okay, I'm comfortable. I can talk to the wall and get a conversation going. So it's never had any trouble with talking to people, but but this is, you guys have really helped me break the ice. It's just your honesty and openness is like, whew, this is awesome. Like I've never had this, so it's awesome. It's awesome for me.
Thanks.
Thanks, Phil.
No, thank you.
I want to apologize. I'm so sorry. Right when the question was posed to me, my child had another question, so I had to remove my headphone and respond to him first. So so Amanda also has asked a question, so this will help a little frame my answer a little bit. So Amanda, yes, I have been in a relationship for more than 20 years, but we are still very much a work in progress. We are by no means perfect, and yes, there are times if my husband tries any assertive communications, I may become aggressive, and there are times when he tries some aggressive communication and I become extremely assertive. So again, we are a work in progress. We are by no means perfect. I was in this relationship pre-injury. I actually was, we were in high school together, so we've been together for a very long time. And the length of our relationship truly has been a strength, because now I think he can breathe funny and I know what is bothering him, and I can look a little frazzled and he knows exactly what is confusing me. Confusion is my most common state of being. So what truly helped me, because I'm not a very assertive communicator or a very aggressive communicator, is that I love chatting. And now you can find GIFs and emojis about everything and anything. And I would much rather, get help from other images, from other things, and use that to communicate my needs rather than, because I'm very shy. I'm painfully, like, I was raised in a very traditional family, not used to talking about sex. I went to a convent school, so this was very difficult for me. But yes, I'm using all external help to further my own mission. So that is my advice to people, like, find a way which you feel communicating in, and you can be authentic about how you are, talking about yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, Luca.
Federico. Oh, sorry, Sherry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, somebody was asking earlier, and I apologize, I was distracted by my cat meowing outside my door. I think for, for some resources, and Wallace, you talked about the importance of couples counseling. And I know for some people, for various reasons, that may not be attainable right away. And one book that I've come across, now it is not disability specific, so I put that out there, but we actually ran a few groups a few years ago at Lyndhurst, and we found that even though it wasn't disability specific, that the tenets, if you will, were very applicable.
Okay.
And I'll put it in the chat, but it looks like this, and it's called Hold Me Tight. And you may have heard of it, yeah, by Dr. Sue Johnson. And I always like to give a shout out because it's Canadian. Yay!
Yay!
Yay! Go Canada! Go Ottawa!
Yeah.
Although she's moved to BC now, but we'll forgive her for deserting Ontario. But she's a developer of something that's called emotionally focused therapy, which is one of the more proven therapies for couples counseling, regardless of what the presenting issue might be. And a lot of focus is on communication, having what she calls an ARE conversation. And she developed Hold Me Tight for people who may not, for whatever reason, want to go to counseling or have access to the resources right away for counseling.
Right.
So that's certainly a book I've recommended, even as in my own relationship, doing the training, reading the book was quite, thinking about Lubna, helping me draw on insights as to how I've behaved in past relationships, current relationships. So yeah, I think it's a fabulous book.
I'm
Cool.
gonna check to see if they have an audio version of that, because I can no
believe
longer,
they do. I believe
I have
they
issues
do.
with reading anymore. I used to be an avid reader, but now it has to be audio.
Well, I'll put the information in the chat box.
Super.
Thank you very much, Sherry.
Thanks, Sherry. That's great. Federico, I don't know if you had a hand up before or if it was just a clapping emoji. Did you have a question?
No, I was just clapping.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yay.
Okay, thanks, Sherry. So Sherry put the name of the book in the chat box. And again, if someone's not able to write the title down or anything, please feel free to email me and I can always send you the information. So it looks like that's it for the chat box. Someone did have to leave. They said, I have to leave, but thank you very much. Interesting topic. And
Has there been any other feedback in the chat regarding?
no, I think that's it for the chat box.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see 11 things there, so I don't know what that means, but
Might have to open that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we got to most of them. Oh, there was a question, which I think Lubna was sort of answering in her answer. It was the question that was about the women. And it says, were they from pre or post injury? I've been finding the advice peer groups are from men with SCI in relationships. And then she just wrote underneath, not that Wallace isn't great.
But there is a big difference,
there is a big
isn't there?
difference.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just read a great research article that was looking at the difference between what's made available for men compared to women and the history that of just things being so penis centric and
All about men.
yeah, and what that means and how far back it goes. And yeah, it's just crazy that it's been around for centuries in different forms. That even with look back at Mr. Freud, right? Men celebrate that they have a penis, and women are envious that they don't have one. And then there's all of the, like, it looked at all those types of things like throughout history, and that the goal was it's either you have one or you don't have one. It's not that you have a vagina, is that you don't have a penis. And it was just, I wish I knew the name of the article, and I would maybe I'll look it up.
And we can put it posted on the site.
I'll post it on the site. Yeah, but it was really fabulous. It was quite eye-opening.
Awesome.
And that's why too, we would really love it that if there's people out there who want to share those stories, because again, this is a very narrow storyline here, right? And the more stories that can be shared, then we can bring those into these conversations as well, so that we can share other people's experience. So it's more well-rounded.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. Just one last comment. It says, sorry, book isn't in Audible.
Oh,
okay.
So, yeah. Okay, so
it looks like it is. It's just sold out. Go
Oh.
figure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if the library has any,
They
do you
very
know if they
well
have it at the
may.
library that you can borrow it? Because I know the library too has a lot of audiobooks as
Yeah,
well.
I'll check that out
You can
for
borrow.
sure.
Yeah, okay. So that's it for the chat. I don't know if there's any last questions, or Wallace and Melanie, if you've got any last final thoughts.
No, I think
No,
we
we
filled
can
people's
sit here and
ears.
talk for another hour if you wanted us
Yeah,
to, but you know, if there's no other questions or comments from the group, then we're good. We just thank you to everybody for coming out and being a part of this. And thank you to Julie for you know, giving us this opportunity into SCIO.
And next week we talk about sex.
Sex. All about
Sex and sexuality.
yeah.
Right? Yeah. So if anyone hasn't signed up for the third part,
Nice, Carrie.
feel free to go onto our website at scioontario.org and you can register for the third session. And Tracy just said, oh my God, another great session. Thank you, everybody. Can we do this weekly?
Was
Yeah,
that- was-
for
You probably
sure.
could, right? There's
Was
so
that-
much information.
Was that Tracy, the sex therapist from Ottawa that you said that?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
There
That's,
you go.
thank you. That's
Yeah, let's
another
do this
feather in
every
the
week.
cap, so.
That'd be awesome.
Okay, so I just want to quickly, so again, thank you, Melanie and Wallace. Another amazing, as everyone says, another amazing conversation.
It was helpful. Yeah.
Absolutely.
For sure. And then just a quick thank you to our sponsors, our provincial partner, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and Hollister, who is our provincial bowel and bladder, as well as vehicle modification sponsors, and also our regional sponsors, Westminster Foundation and Economic Insurance. So thank you all again for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you back next week.
See you next week, guys.
Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for your
everyone.
time. Bye-bye.
Bye, Wallace.
Bye.